Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, Chapter 21. The First Visit of Beelzebub to India. Beelzebub continued to speak as follows. Sitting in a chai-hana in this small town of Argenia, I once overheard a conversation among several beings seated not far from me. They were talking and deciding when and how they should go by caravan to Pearl Land. Having listened to their conversation, I gathered that they intended to go there for the purpose of exchanging their turquoises for what are called pearls. I must here, by the way, draw your attention also to the fact that your favorites of former as well as of contemporary epochs liked and still like to wear pearls and also the said turquoise, as well as many other what are called precious trinkets, for the purpose, as they say, of adorning their exteriors. But if you would like to know my opinion, they do so, of course, instinctively, in order to offset, so to say, the value of their inner insignificance. At that period to which my present tale refers, the said pearls were very rare among the beings of the second Asiatic group, and commanded a high price among them. But in the country Pearl Land, there was at the same time a great number of these pearls, and there, on the contrary, they were very cheap, because pearls at that time were exclusively obtained only from the water spaces surrounding that country. The mentioned conversation of the beings who sat near me in the chai-hana in the small town Argenia then immediately interested me, because at that time I already had the intention of going to that same Pearl Land where the three-brained beings of the continent Ashark of the third group bred. And the conversation I then heard at once evoked in my mentation an association to the effect that it might be better to go to the country Pearl Land directly from here, with this large caravan of these beings, rather than return the same way to the Sea of Beneficence, and from there, by means of the same ship occasion, to reach this country. Although this journey, which in those days was almost impossible for the beings of the earth, would take us a good deal of time, yet I thought that the journey back to the Sea of Beneficence, with its unforeseeable contingencies, would perhaps not take much less time. This association then arose in my mentation chiefly because I had long before heard a great deal about the rare peculiarities of those parts of the nature of that peculiar planet through which the proposed route of the caravan lay, and in consequence, what is called a being love of knowledge, which was already crystallized in me, having received a shock for functioning from all that had been overheard, immediately dictated to my common presence the need to be persuaded of everything personally, directly through my own perceptive organs. So, my boy, owing to what I've said, I intentionally sat with the conversing beings and joined in their deliberations. As a result of it all, we also were then included in the company of their caravan, and 2 days later we set off together with them. I and Ahun then passed through indeed very unusual places, unusual even for the general nature of this peculiar planet. Certain parts of which, by the way, only became so because before that period, this ill-fated planet had already undergone 2 what are called transalpalnian perturbations, almost unprecedented in the universe. From the first day, we had to pass exclusively through a region of various terra firma projections of unusual forms, which had conglomerations of all kinds of intraplanetary minerals. And only after a month's travel according to their time calculation, did our caravan from Argania come to places where, in the soil, the possibility had not yet been quite destroyed of nature's forming surplanetary formations, and creating corresponding conditions for the arising and existing of various one-brained and two-brained beings. After every kind of difficulty, we at last, one rainy morning, on ascending a height, suddenly saw on the horizon the outline of a large water space bordering the edges of the continent Ashark, which was then called Pearl Land. And 4 days later we came to the chief point of the existence of the beings of that third group, then the city Caimon. Having arranged there the place of our permanent existence, we did nothing during our first days there but stroll about the streets of the town, observing the specific manifestations of the beings of that third group in the process of their ordinary existence. It cannot be helped, my dear Hussein. Now that I have told you the history of the arising of the second group of the three-brained beings of the continent Ashark, I must tell you also about the history of the arising of the third group. You must indeed tell me, my dear and beloved grandfather, eagerly exclaimed Hussein. And this time, with great reverence, extending his hands upward, he sincerely said, "May my dear and kind grandfather become worthy to be perfected to the degree of the sacred Al-Klad." Without saying anything to this, Beelzebub merely smiled and continued to relate as follows. The history of the arising of this third group of Asiatic beings begins only a little later than that period when the families of hunters of Pirmarals first came to the shores of the Sea of Beneficence from the continent Atlantis, and having settled there, founded the second group of Asiatic beings. It was just in those, for your contemporary favorites, infinitely remote days, that is, not long before the second Transapalnian perturbation occurred to this ill-fated planet, that there had already begun to be crystallized in the presences of the three-centered beings, then, of the continent Atlantis, certain consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer, on account of which the need, among other needs unbecoming to three-brained beings, began to arise in them to wear, as I've already told you, various trinkets, as it were, for their adornment, and also a kind of famous what is called talisman, which they had invented. One of these trinkets, then on the continent Atlantis, just as now on the other continents of the planet Earth, was and is this same pearl. The said pearl is formed in one-brained beings, which breed in the Saliakuriap of your planet Earth, that is to say, in that part of it which is called Hentralispana, or as your favorites might express it, the blood of the planet, which is present in the common presence of every planet, and which serves the actualizing of the process of the most great common cosmic Trogo-Autoegocrat. And there on your planet, this part is called water. This one-brained being, in which the said pearl is formed, used to breed in the Saliakuriapnian or water areas surrounding the continent Atlantis. But in consequence of the great demand for the said pearl, and therefore of the great destruction of these one-brained, pearl-bearing beings, soon none were left near this continent,